So let's get to the agenda, which is right here, which is what you weren't seeing. So enforcement discretion, ag water definition as far as the produce safety rule is concerned, harvest and post-harvest water and testing, what record requirements there are, at least for harvest and post-harvest, inspections, what is that going to look like, resources, and then again, kind of what we covered. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I didn't see any pop through on registrations, but feel free to put them there, raise your hand at the end, and we'll cover what we can. So, enforcement discretion. This part is for harvest and post-harvest water. As you can tell right there, large farms, their enforcement discretion ended last year. This year it's for small farms, and then January of 2025 is very small. So the approach that we're taking, at least for on the inspection side, is an educate while we regulate. So we know that this part of the role has taken a long time to come into what we would be inspecting. So we want to make sure that everyone understands what compliance looks like and what that would look like for your specific farm. So we are wanting to make sure that the water that you're using for the produce that you're growing isn't a source of adulteration. So the big definition, right? So ag water. What do we mean when we say ag water or agricultural water? The produce safety rule says any water that comes into contact with the harvestable portion of the crop. When does that start? That starts at the flowering cycle onward. So anytime that water comes into contact, that would be considered ag water. In a couple slides, I have what would be considered harvest and post-harvest water. So that way you have a better idea of what that will look like, because each farm is different. And then this is something that I definitely drill with our inspectors is the quality of the water. It has to have no detectable generic E. coli in a 100 milliliter sample. So if you're doing your own testing, you would have to show that there's no detectable generic E. coli in the water that you're using if it's coming into contact with the harvestable portion of the crop. And specifically for harvest and post-harvest water, right now, you cannot use untreated surface water. So making sure that you're using a scientific method if you are using surface water, so that way you're not contaminating your produce. Testing. So for harvest and post-harvest, again, no detectable generic E. coli. If your water, if you test and there's no detectable generic E. coli, you only need to test once a year after that. If you have anything above that threshold, your water source will need to be tested 4 times in a year until you can show that there is no detectable generic E. coli. So making sure that the water has no E. coli, and then if you do find E. coli, developing a way for water treatment, monitoring to make sure that that is something that is the source of it, record your corrective actions so that way you can show that it's happening. Now, sometimes that might actually have to be a water system inspection, so that way making sure that your pipes or where the water is coming in is of a good quality, so that way it's not contaminating your water there. So if there's a crack in your wellhead, you know, patching that up, because that might be your source of contamination with E. coli. So just kind of making sure that you've covered your bases, developing that water treatment, doing any corrective actions, and recording them as appropriate. So these are going to be the records that an inspector would be wanting to see if and when you get inspected, right? If you're not under enforcement discretion, these are the ones that they'll want to look at. Your water system inspection, so making sure that needs to be done on an annual basis. So making sure that you have record keeping showing that you did right? Making sure that, if there's any rubber seals or any pipes, or again, if you have a wellhead, making sure that it's good to go before you start using the water from that. Testing records, again, if you have testing records showing no detectable generic E. coli, if you use a municipal water source and you don't actually test your water yourself, you just need to have the records from wherever you're getting your water showing that there's no detectable generic E. coli. And then, of course, the ones, if applicable, right? If it's above that threshold, if you needed to do water treatment, any corrective actions, again, if applicable. And then if you are using surface water and treating it, what scientific method you used in order to treat said water source. And then, of course, with the produce safety rule, there's always a record retention. And so what that is, 2 years. So you would need to have 2 years of records for all of these, if and when applicable. So you may or may not know, but there is a proposed ag water rule for pre-harvest water. One of the things that the FDA developed was a ag water assessment builder. Now, it was for just the pre-harvest water. However, you can use it if you want to for your harvest and post-harvest water. So that way you can do a risk assessment on your water sources to see, where are my risks? What should I be paying attention to? And with this tool, they do not keep the information. So the FDA isn't secretly taking that information and using it. You can use the tool freely, just put in whatever inputs you want. So that way you can figure out, where are my risks on my farm? What can I be doing? What kind of corrective actions do I need to have in place? A plan B, right? I'm always a big proponent of what's the plan B through Z. So making sure that you can kind of assess that. And you should do it for each source of water that you use. So if you use multiple, so if you use, municipal water and maybe well water, going through the assessment builder on both. So that way you have a better understanding of where your risks are. And then one of the big ones that you kind of see in the assessment builder is the adjacent land use. So what's the topography around your farm? How is it slanted? If you have a flooding event, where is the water going to pool? So that way you can figure out, do I need to kind of grade my farm in order to keep, runoff, or divert the water somewhere else so it's not going to contaminate anything? And then, of course, any mitigation and action plans, going through, again, that assessment builder. You're going through all of that and then figuring out, okay, if this does happen on my farm, how am I going to make sure that I'm preventing produce from getting contaminated by my water source? So we've gone through all that. So what will an inspection look like? If your farm is still currently under enforcement discretion, so if you're a very small farm, you won't be inspected against subpart E. That's where the ag water rule stays. But it could be a conversation, because we know that there are a lot of questions. There's a lot of concerns about ag water, what that will look like. So they may just ask you questions on, do you have these records? What kind of water source do you use? So that way, when you get another inspection, say 1 to 3 years down the line, you know what they'll be asking for and then be able to produce those records. Now, they won't be inspecting you against the ag water rule. However, if they do see a cause, or what we call an imminent threat to human health, or that direct route of contamination, that will be a strong conversation. Those observations will be written down, but otherwise it will remain just a conversation. If you are no longer under enforcement discretion, so they will be checking for all of that. So again, educate while we regulate. We want to make sure that you understand what compliance looks like. We don't want to beat down on you, but we do want to make sure that you're compliant. So any significant observations will be noted. I do want to take the time here to say that after March 13th of last year, our how we track things, so how we report things changed. So that meant how we fill out our inspection forms changed as well. So in the past, you probably would have only seen anything of those imminent threats, right? So typically you may have seen blank inspection forms, what is called a 4056, because only any routes of contamination or egregious conditions, it was the old wording that they used, then that was the only thing reported. After March of last year, that changed to any significant observations. So unfortunately, that kind of put into line when small and very small farms were just getting their initial. And so it gave the wrong impression of, I thought it was just education, but it's just how we have to report now. It's not because we're seeing more stuff on smaller farms, it's just how we have to aggregate the data and how we have to report. So it's not because we're seeing more, it's just how we have to report. And this is on the national level too. This isn't just something that we saw in Colorado. It seems to be there was some confusion on that the smaller farms were getting more of the stick than the honey. And so I just wanted to clear the air that that's just not the case.
I'll add, just so everybody's clear, it is, just as Sarah said, it is not that we don't want or that we're finding anymore. It really is a document, but it serves another purpose. If we look at what we've done in the past, and we get to a farm and we see, boy, there's 5 things we're noting now. We don't even look back if they've had another inspection before and say, oh, they've improved or they've gotten worse, because we don't know, because we didn't document anything before. So therefore, we can't tell whether things are better or worse. It also means when we were doing it before, we couldn't tell where growers were struggling because we didn't document. And when I say struggling, sometimes that's just the information we were providing. We weren't providing the information that growers needed to help them because we didn't document it. So it's really incumbent on us to help you, and to help you, we've got to be able to tell you what we find and to help develop those tools to help. So that's really the whole purpose behind it.
Yeah, thank you, Dwayne. Yeah. So with that inspection reporting, what I was just kind of covering, so you went through the inspection, the inspector will tell you, like, these are the things that I found, these are the observations that I'm writing down. And then they'll be developing a corrective action plan with you. That's something that's a little bit different than maybe you have had to deal with in the past, but your inspectors will be doing a little bit more follow-up. So the inspection summary report. So Dwayne is the one that usually typically emails those out, kind of highlights, here are the things that we saw, here are the things that we'll be following up on. So that way you know exactly what the conversation you had with your inspector. They're the ones that fill out this form. And then highlight any of those observations that were found, not just ag water, but any other compliance issues. And then any follow-up that was noted, that will be done by the inspector. So, working out that timeline with them so that way they can follow up accordingly. So that way you're in the know. So you do get this inspection summary report. So if you're taking notes during the inspection, you're more than welcome to, but any significant observations will be noted on that inspection summary report and any follow-up that will be needed. Resources. So just went through all this information, but what's out there that you can read up on so that way you can be in compliance with the rule. So this is kind of our little shameless plug here. We do have an annual report that we put out, specifically why this one that I'm highlighting here, the 2023, is this one isn't just an annual report, but we put resources in it, a bunch of different resources, because we know that farms want them. So included in there is the ag water part. There's an ag water part in there. So all the FDA ag water fact sheets that have come out, those are in there. Any record templates, not just ag water, but for that water system inspection, if you don't have one and need a record template, it's in there. You can find this annual report on our website, or if you would like a hard copy, let me know and I'd be happy to ship one out to you. So here's our website. This is where you can find all that information. And then also, if you want to find out more about the proposed ag water rule, we do have that on our website as well. So that way you can find out what that may be looking like. Nothing's finalized. It's still proposed. So and then if there's any resources that you don't see here that you would like, please let us know. We'd be happy to send them to you or create anything that isn't already available. So that is it. Again, we wanted to give enough time for any questions that anybody had. So does anyone have any questions? I do